You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Welcome back to On the Way Home. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly, and today we're joined by someone whose leadership and vision continue to reshape what's possible for affordable housing in Ontario. Mwarigha, Vice President of Housing Growth, Development and Asset Sustainability at WoodGreen Community Services. Toronto's housing system is under immense strain. Home prices have soared to 9 times median income. Purpose-built rental has stalled, and for every new home we create, we lose 15 older affordable units. 2/3 of workers across the GTHA are spending more than 30% of their income just to keep a roof overhead. None of this is sustainable for families, employers, or the future of our provincial economy. But today's conversation is about a path forward, one rooted in possibility rather than crisis. WoodGreen, alongside BILDGTA, FRPO, ONPHA and Arcadis, are advancing a bold concept, the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. It's a province-wide, Ontario-backed investment fund designed to unlock the upfront capital developers desperately need to get affordable rental housing built at scale. We'll explore how the Affordable Housing Investment Fund could bring institutional investors back to the table, de-risk projects, accelerate approvals, and support the creation of vibrant, mixed-income, sustainable communities across Ontario. And of course, we'll talk about what home means to Mwarigha and how he shows up in a moment that can feel overwhelmingly complex. Let's dive in. Mwarigha, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
We're excited to hear from you again. What does home mean to you?
What does home mean to me? Home is where I meet, like most human beings, my basic human need for shelter. It's the foundation of my close relationships, family, friends. It's also the place I retreat to. It's the place I replenish, and I project my ambitions on how and what to contribute to the broader society. It's a place of comfort. It's a place of intimacy. It's a place of thinking. It's just that holistic place where I, as a human being, experience myself emotionally, intellectually, and fundamental needs of a place to put my head at night and replenish. So, and I believe that every human being, for that matter, every living creature, deserves that as a foundational piece in the well-being of their lives, in their lives' well-being. Yeah.
And for listeners meeting you for the first time, can you briefly share your journey? What led you into housing development, community planning, and this lifelong career that you've had in advancing housing justice?
Yeah, no, I came to Canada maybe 35 plus years ago as a young person, primarily came to school, but also I came to Canada with a fairly strong social justice experience. I came as a refugee student under the World University Student Program, WUSC, and went to graduate school in Windsor. I registered to do urban planning in the urban geography program as a master's student. Really, actually was more interested in the intellectual dimension of what I do. Ironically, as I was looking for things that would really ground me in my new country of immigration, I found myself saying I need to really understand some of the fundamental social justice issues that most Canadians, local Canadians, are having to grapple with. And at that point in Windsor, the auto industry was laying off people. It was a really tough time, one of those other big retrenchment and scenarios. And I just decided this is the topic that was going to ground me in my new country of choice. And through a broader sense of the social service and social impact implications of that, I narrowed in on housing, built built that as a core foundation piece. Did a lot of, and moved to Toronto. Did a lot of work as an advocate for newcomer communities in the rental housing market. Built that into a policy. Worked in social planning council, and eventually, of course, tapped into some of my sort of my strong academic foundations around urban planning and urban development, and slowly over time, after going through that period of really knowledge building around social impact and social justice in the context of the economy and how it affects people's lives and well-being, I transitioned to advocacy, to policy through the Social Planning Council, direct human rights work as well, which I found extremely rewarding in Toronto, which is what combined my activist dimension, and eventually finding myself in housing management and housing development, all in the context of community planning and community building, as really the primary North Star for wanting to get myself engaged in this work. And that, for the most part, remains why I'm still just as passionate as I was 20, 30 years ago about where we need to go as in community building with the foundation of social justice. Yeah.
That's such a very, very rich journey. Thank you for sharing. And yeah. I'm going to take us to a moment, for our listeners. Actually, Mwarigha was a mentor for Alex and myself at Blue Door when we started our first affordable housing development. And I remember getting on a meeting with him one day, and I must have been a bit charged up or frazzled or something. And Mwarigha said to me, "Emmy, life is not that difficult." And you went on to explain to me how we can look at life. And I wanted to raise that on this podcast because I feel that, our listeners and, those in housing have a bit of an uphill climb. And I feel like it's a complex challenge that's ahead of us with the housing crisis. And I'd love for you to share about this approach. How can we live it? How does it shape the way you lead and solve problems and approach the complex housing landscape that we face right now?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I actually didn't share with you where the genesis of that was. It was through a conversation with my late father, who was in the medical profession. And as we talked, he said to me, and I was, again, same thing. I was in that state, and I was trying to talk to him about some of the complexity that I was encountering in work and trying to solve these complex problems. And he said to me, the solution is not in the pain, right? So as much pain as you feel about it, that's not necessarily where the solution is. The solution lies in putting yourself into a solution mode. And you cannot generate solutions if you are frazzled about the situation. And so what I try to do in my profession, he said, is I don't fall in love with the pain. I try and step back and say, life is not that difficult. I can figure this out. And so that's really the fundamental genesis of what that is. And for me and my colleagues, and for you, when I speak to people, I said, yes, we are at a difficult moment. There is no doubt. We have the nonprofit sector, which is the conduit for all housing for people who are hard to house and people who are transitioning out of homeless, been really marginalized and not really been central to government policy and funding for the last 20, 30 years. So that's not a challenge that you can just overlook. However, at the same time, because we have that moral fortitude and we have that commitment, we need to turn it into a solution mode and shape the way and shape the solutions that we need. And I'm glad that, many of us were able to champion sort of a renaissance of a housing approach for this country that goes across the whole spectrum of housing, which is what really we had lost for a while. We made the assumption that with the condominium industry and the private sector in the last 15 years being at the really forefront of it, and that somehow that trickle down would produce results of housing that we could house poor and unhoused people, and that just wasn't the case. So what that has meant in terms of trying to be in the solution mode is to say, how can we as a nonprofit sector take advantage of the key levers here that have been provided for us? We have a crisis. The crisis has forced a new policy rethink on the part of government. You wouldn't have made them think like, come to the table that way. The crisis has given the private sector a moment to rethink, because for a while they had forgotten that the product of housing has to be connected with the income and the population and the needs of income. And I'm glad to say that there's a lot of people who have leaned into that way of looking at it. Very big developers, and they form the core of our partnerships. And then thirdly, that as a nonprofit sector, we should be working with these two levers to make sure that new housing programs, new housing projects have a significant amount of deeply affordable housing. Today, as you know, everybody references affordability, right? And that in some ways is our big lever. And so, life is not that difficult. Just lean into the levers that you have and be intentional, be disciplined, and assume some degree of leadership. This is our moment of leadership as the non-profit sector, and we can't be seen to be flustered. We must be seen to be confident, and because we have ultimately the issue of affordability is essentially core to our mission and our values. That's really where that whole statement is coming from, and how it shapes how I do things.
So to all our listeners, you heard it here. Do not fall in love with the pain. Focus on solutions, because they are there. We have the levers. We're getting the levers. Mwarigha, you're leading WoodGreen's strategy to deliver 5,000 new affordable homes. Could you tell us, what does large-scale nonprofit-led development look like in practice, and what makes it possible today compared to a decade ago?
Yeah. So I was very impressed. WoodGreen has always, WoodGreen is a multi-service organization. We have housing, we have employment, we have health. We're big in an integrated approach to housing and providing a holistic wraparound, so that a client, when you look at things through the clients that we have, homeless, people with mental health addictions, we can provide them, and back to your first question, to that foundational part of rebuilding their lives, or pivoting their lives, so that they can achieve the and connect to society in a better way. So building home for tenants is important. For the longest time, we'd always assumed that this is something that was going to come through others, through the old housing programs, through the private sector. We built a very strong housing help center that was intentionally going out to the private sector to get housing for the hard to house people coming out of homeless, people with addictions, and we would create wraparound supports and relationships with the private sector that way. So we had a little bit of a leeway. However, in the last 15 years, we noticed that the market, even the slimmest of opportunities for housing, were beginning to get out of the range of our affordability, as the market, the rents continued to balloon and balloon and balloon. So the housing help center became in some way a little bit ineffective. And so at that point we said, we have to be part of the solution. We have to be part of building. At the same time, we started building again, starting 2017. We built a 34-unit, 36-unit building on Gerrard Street. And that was a real teacher of how do we, as a nonprofit, interact with the market? How do we create partnerships? How do we manage relationships with government? And so, unlike the first generation of projects, housing projects, we were driving the creation of housing, and that was fundamental. And then at some point, we realized through the board, and the board was very encouraging, that we needed to go big. If we only built 36 units every other year, it would never come anywhere near. And so we put out an ambitious goal, 5,000 units in the next, by the end of this decade. And but what we also decided to do is be a little smart about how we were going to do that. And so recognize that we had limitations about how much development we could do, because that is not core to our mission, but also taking advantage of the new relationships that we had started to build with the private sector and the private development sector industry. At the same time, when we were building Gerrard, we also got into a partnership with the Daniels Corporation. And we essentially, through a leasehold arrangement and funding from the city, bought a stake of 34 units in the 340-unit building. And that also taught us, opened up a new type of way in which we could inject affordable housing into the market. And so what does, to your question, what makes it possible? It's tapping into those opportunities in the open market that had now been created because of the new level of understanding about the need to inject affordable housing. And it wasn't just all, a good thing to do. We were paying our way into those developments in order to create long-term affordability for those units. So those units now, for the last 4 years, been home to homeward bound graduates. And they have gone on to work and thrive and be part of a whole community. So part of that outcome for us that we've realized is that we're able to inject our tenants, the ones who have especially come through our programs, be part of these bigger communities. They have friends, they have relationships, they share amenities. And it was a real sort of mind opener. Notwithstanding that we still understand that core to what we do is supporting people coming out of homeless. And for that type of group, we do need supportive housing. And so the injection of government funding in a very significant way is still key to making that part of the population sufficiently housed. So
can I ask you, in those units you just referred to where you partnered to get a percentage of units to maintain affordability, are those operated by WoodGreen? And how do you ensure the long-term sustainability of affordability in those spots?
So we have, the lease is 40 years old, right? It's 40. And 40 was something that, that we had to get the developer to there. They say to us today, if you want us to make it 99 years, we don't have a problem. We'll do that, right? So practice has, proven, even to a private developer, that this was the right thing to do. So the longevity of it is not the issue. The sustainability of it, of course, is it's a leasehold. We're responsible for the tenancy. So those tenants continue to lean on WoodGreen where they need our supports in order to be successful tenants. We have a share services agreement where property management is provided to this unit at the same standard as everybody else in that building. And it has also, in some ways, compelled WoodGreen to sort of lean into how some of the efficiencies in the private sector maintenance and tenancy management can be of benefit to even bringing those learnings back to our own generic stock. So it's, at this point, it's looking like a really good decision that we made, and every year sort of reinforces that. And We have no worries about its sustainability. We've taken that model now and are shopping it around. We've got some really strong partnerships around that. But we've also taken that model and now injected it into a number of proposals that we have out there that will form part of our 5,000 units. We have a pipeline right now, a concrete pipeline of about 3,000 units that we could say by the end of 2027 are sort of signed and sealed. And there are a variety of this, as well as actual co-ownership, where we inject equity at the upfront, like we did. The Daniels one, the equity came a little later. Now, if we inject it upfront, we can create a bigger stake of ownership in a bigger sort of housing complex. And like I said, it helps us to also achieve a scenario where our tenants are also lived in mixed income, healthy neighborhoods, and so on and so forth, as opposed to a separation and distinct kind of housing portfolio. And it's so far so good.
That's awesome. So we'll focus for a minute that Toronto is losing 15 older affordable units for every one that gets built. So maybe if you can talk about some of the key forces that brought us to this moment of deep housing scarcity, and also if you can touch on what you've spoken about with the collapse of purpose-built rental and the retreat of federal funding, and how do these historic shifts still shape our housing system today?
Yeah. I mean, we look back in the 70s, of course, and in our transition away from public housing, which was primarily what was built from after the war and so on and so forth, we injected two interesting vehicles on how to accelerate the development of housing in the city, as the city of Toronto now began to sort of manifest the characteristics of a modern city, or metropolis, as we call it. So two things happened. One is we injected tax incentives that allowed us to build a significant stock of purpose-built rental housing. You will hear of the concept of MURBs, or low-income dividend housing. That is exactly what it was. It's essentially a tax system that incentivizes the development, the investment, attracts the investment of into purpose-built rental. In parallel to that, we also injected a vehicle of community housing, which is the foundational pieces, the genesis of the nonprofit sector as a key component in the market. Somewhere in the 80s, we started to have a little bit of the first sort of level of issues were with the collapse of the Canada Assistance Plan, which was from 1965 anchored this shared burden between the different levels of government on this whole realm of social services, housing, health, and welfare, and so on and so forth. And so we started this siloing the health piece from the social piece, and now we have the health transfer and we have the social transfer, and somehow in that process, housing was offered. And so the incentives to the private purpose-built rental did not happen. And subsequent to that, we retreated from the affordable nonprofit housing sector. We can digest the politics that led us to that. It was this whole deficit, and that was sort of the mantra of the day. And then at the same time, the assumption that now we were at a point where the private sector, particularly home ownership driven, would be the primary driver of resolving the housing needs of Canadians and indeed Torontonians. So that's really what the genesis. That is how we got to this point. And then, of course, once we really just had one tool in the toolbox, and that is the private sector, and then we have the the financial crisis in the US, and ironically, creating an influx of investment into Canada's real estate condominium market. As running away from that, we all got really excited in the early 2010s and into 2020 about how many more cranes we were having. But those were really creating the housing type that was going to be the genesis of our problem today. Because what those did, they did two things. One, they just sucked investment into real estate investment into that kind of housing. People started to build for returns, right? And the square footage and density became the driver. So, the genesis of the whole matchbox type of buildings that don't actually match the population, right? And so now we started to mass units without enough sufficient community infrastructure and stuff like that. And that has created a crisis of its own. They also, because they were being mortgaged and were being bought for speculation, they created a market for investment. Once they created an investment market, they forced rents to go up, right? And without any rent restrictions at the starting base of these units, the rents went up so much. And the purpose-built rental, traditionally, the traditional purpose-built rental, which had always sort of gone up by your normal cost of living, all of a sudden found an opportunity to also come into this new industry where you could start rents at any levels. And so you can start to see how the affordability gap between people's income, which initially people tried to solve by doubling up and doing this and that. But eventually it just brought the system to a scenario where the supply was not matching the demand, because the demand just didn't have the income to support that supply. And that brings us to the 2020 period. In some ways, COVID created a pause.
Thanks, Mwarigha. Your passion is evident. Let's talk about the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. What inspired this model, and why is it a potential game changer for Ontario?
So I spoke about the fact that one of the key things that sort of skewed the market and messed up the affordability and all those factors that I've been talking about is in the last 10, 15 years, pretty much one type of investment was the one that was driving the so-called housing boom, which turned out to be the condominium housing, at least in respect to acting as a proxy for the rental market. So the Affordable Housing Investment Fund is a way of suggesting. Now, part of that, of course, with COVID is a lot of that investment has sort of shied away. So as many incentives as we're putting, we have a very difficult scenario because we don't have the investment part in the market back. The opportunity here, though, is to create within Ontario, in order to attract investors back into the purpose-built rental that includes affordability in its different ranges, is to create a vehicle that does two things. One, that lends money, equity money upfront. The biggest part of development in the development value chain is the front end, that 10-15% that you need, partly to drive it through your approvals, partly to drive it through the feasibility studies and the business cases that you need in order to start to access the other benefits in the development chain, which is entitlements from the city, from the different levels of government, incentives, in addition to also one of the best instruments in the world for housing development, which is CMHC's long-term debts and its really friendly terms. Without that front-end piece, which is what is really holding back the reigniting of the market, but pivoting to a stronger sense of affordability, without that initial investment, we are not going to see a restart. But it's also an opportunity to restart the market with the parameters that I've been talking about, of creating quality mixed income developments. So the Affordable Housing Fund should, so part of this is to say in Ontario, we need a tool that in fact will put in enough money through a fund that will attract other investors to come in within that purpose, but also that will act as a guarantee, because those are the two things that investors need in order to come back. And I predict that if we do that properly, it will re-attract a lot of investors who right now are probably toying with the idea of going to tech stocks, AI stocks, and so on, at the expense of affordable housing. And that for me, that's the thing that I believe will really kickstart a re-energize scaling development of affordable purpose-built rental housing in the province. With you?
Sorry. Do you think you could explain to me how AHIF is, like, what is the program? How will it attract investors? Like, how is that set up? Is it like an investment vehicle, or?
It's an investment vehicle. You got that word. That's exactly what it is. It's an investment vehicle. Here is the Affordable Investment Fund. Hopefully we can get a guarantee from the government of Ontario. Again, this is not money that is just being spent. It's a guarantee that they provide. Maybe an initial investment, close to $300-400 million as well, with returns, provided with returns, to primarily serve the market as an upfront equity investment fund. The way that works is, of course, there's two ways to pay back a fund like that. One is, the easiest form is, of course, to pay it back at the point of long-term debt. You can integrate that into your long-term debt. But because we're creating mixed income communities that have got market and lower end, low rent housing, because we're creating that profile, we can also use the market portions to pay back on sort of a long-term basis the equity fund. And the idea is for that money to keep coming back and rotating into the fund and replenish and create a sustainable way of jump-starting the rental housing market. Because it's a vehicle that has got some degree of public outcomes, public backing, the ethos of what commands that fund is to make sure that we don't recreate the same skewed kind of market that we had between 2010 and 2020, and that this one has the balance of affordability and it has the balance of quality and serves the different sectors of our population through that mixed income model.
So essentially, am I capturing it right, that for like the attraction for, you mentioned pension funds, corporate investors, impact lenders, it would almost be akin to like a community bond where you could invest in there and get a rate of return and know that you're doing something impactful? Is that
100%? It's really, it's like a community bond, but a community bond that's working through your sort of traditional investment vehicle format to attract a much wider range of investors, because community bonds tend to be more localized in their appeal of how you fund them. But this one now starts to go more mainstream, returns to the mainstream investment world as a legitimate tool for getting a decent return, not the highest market one. People are still going to do tech stocks and so on and so forth. But for people with patient capital, for people with impact funding, this would be a very attractive outlet for their investment for a public purpose.
You're so knowledgeable in housing, affordable housing, the history, the potential solutions. You also oversee WoodGreen's asset sustainability and climate change strategy. So can you share with us, how do we build and modernize affordable housing in ways that are green, resilient, and future-proof?
Again, just this actually just comes from your earlier question and statement, where it's easy to fall in love with development, right? I talked about and forget what else is there. So keeping a look at our current portfolio is old. We talked about the fact that after 1980s, there was very little investment, both private and nonprofit. So a significant number of that stock that is now the housing of choice, or for many of our clients and the middle class workforce, is aging, and because of inflation is falling behind in terms of maintenance, because maintenance costs rise and so on and so forth. So we do have a danger, as you pointed out earlier, that we're losing, every 15 units we're losing, maybe we're trying to build one and we're losing 15. So this is the essence of the asset sustainability. So the question that came to me and us at WoodGreen was, how do we then refinance basically the renewal of these buildings so that they continue to be fit for purpose for our seniors, for a vulnerable population, given that we cannot raise rent, A, and B, that we have very limited reserves. So in addition to just the moral attraction and connection of our vision to creating greener, more sustainable buildings, we found an opportunity to use energy savings and all these other different water and electricity components of our buildings as a way to actually finance the renewal of our buildings. So one of our more successful portfolio-wide projects that is also an award winner, both nationally as the first sort of turning energy savings into a financial tool, and is recognized by the Green Building Council, is our project with the Efficiency Capital. We've actually just recently also received an award from NRG, which is a North American recognized energy efficiency and buildings and infrastructure. We shared a bronze medal with Columbia University, by the way, which has way more endowments than WoodGreen can even begin to think of. So we feel like we're a little player in the big field. But the essence of it is to make sure that our buildings continue to be modernized, we also realize that through that we could achieve our climate change goals, and we could, to your point, future-proof the purpose of the building, which is to continue to house. And of course, like I said, showcase a financing method that says, energy savings are called energy savings because at some point it means they are saving you money. And by the way, how do you tap into that money so that that money is the one that pays for those for that renewal and modernization and retrofit of your buildings? And that has been the magic of what we're doing. We currently have one of the biggest building retrofit projects in the city of Toronto at 444 Logan. It's north of 30 million, and it's going to be a showcase. We've got a research and development component that will then translate into a teaching tool for both the private purpose-built and the nonprofit sector on how to reinvigorate older stock, and given that we can't build our way into the problem per se.
And so you're also deeply involved in community leadership, advocacy, including supporting Black housing equity efforts. What systemic shifts do you believe are most needed to ensure equitable access to housing across communities?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of things. The most significant thing, like I said, is we've come out of a scenario where we had a very skewed investment market, and that market was sort of appealing to the highest price, the highest bidder in rental and in the home ownership. And like I said, we need to sort of re-gear our investment with a stronger public purpose. And one of those public purposes in the investment, injections and outcome, is to create vehicles like the Affordable Housing Investment Fund that also have reward people for having indigenous housing in the portfolio, meeting the needs of Black and marginalized, meeting the needs of people coming out of homelessness, and creating that variety. So that's sort of the big sort of return to really a social impact that has that perspective. The second one is, within the city of Toronto, for example, one of the things that has happened to the market is with inclusive zoning, most of the benefits that are to developers for inclusive zoning, bonusing, and so on, only really play out in the downtown. If you go to the outer parts of the city, in the inner suburbs of Toronto, the neighborhoods like Jane Finch in Scarborough and so on, where workforce and low-income people live, there's very little activity happening in terms of real estate. So we need to have a very strong equity lens. We need to make sure that when we provide those incentives, that we have incentives that are skewed to drive investors to build in some of these areas that have become sort of development deserts, right? Or development drought areas. And so that's, for me, is very important. And then in addition to that, building capacity within these communities so that they can drive and participate in development of new affordable and mixed income housing, affordable home ownership, real estate options that within the reach and means of these equity seeking groups.
You answered the very last question without me even asking. So I'm going to ask you about Homelessness Connect Toronto. You've been a driving force. I believe you're president on the board.
Yes, I'm the chair of the board. Yeah.
Can you tell us how the initiative began, your role in shaping it, and then share with the listeners a heartwarming or memorable story that captures what all of this means to the community to end off?
Yeah, so I've been chair of Homeless Connect Toronto for the last 5 years. Homeless Connect Toronto actually has been around for about 10, 11 years. We have very dynamic leadership over that period. Melody Lee is our executive director, and we're largely a volunteer-driven organization. And the essence of what Homeless Connect does is we have a plethora of services and opportunities and people who want to give in order to serve directly the needs of the homeless. So Homeless Connect was created around creating this big one-stop convention-like event where all these services, city services that touch homelessness, from access to housing, to social assistance, to services that provide basic, system access tools like IDs and so on for homeless people. Businesses that want to come and participate in providing all kinds of services, medical services, hearing, to help people with their hearing, to make appointments and do some basic, your basic visit to the doctor and, do some basic metrics and provide appointments. Homeless people aspire to have a complete life just like all of us. So they have pets. So we provide for vets to come in there. So you can imagine just this event that we have at the last Sunday of October. We have almost a standard 1,000+ attendance of homeless people. We have close to 400 service providers, including people from, like I said, the business community, Ryerson, TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, providing the facility at the old Maple Leaf Gardens, now called the TMU Center, I believe. And on that whole day, homeless people come, they're provided with a concierge, an army of about 400 volunteers, taken from all facets of the community, including young people, because that's their immersion and direct contribution. And we give them concierge services, and we say, we have 100 things here for you. Can you create a priority for yourself? And you have a concierge person that will take you to all the different stops that we have. We have knapsacks, we have hairdressers, we have foot care doctors, we have eye doctors, the city has a plethora, and all other social services, including WoodGreen, are here. Pick what was most important with you, and I think that's where the special interaction between Homeless Connect and the homeless people begins, because that's the point at which we negotiate and discuss and enable currency. You have the currency to choose in what seems like a big shopping center what it is that is important to you. And so we do that over and over again the whole day for about 1,000 people. We have food. This year we were privileged to have the mayor, Olivia Chow, come and visit and give a speech at our usual lunchtime piece. So you can imagine those dynamics. And to end with your other question, which is reflect on a moment or a memorable story. I'm there the whole day. We've done this for 5 years, and we do this, and we're part of this event, and we're moving things along. And just to be honest, 90% of the time is just being sort of overwhelmed and feeling somewhat good that we've created this opportunity. And I just happened to walk by one of the service stations, and one of these service stations, which always makes me curious, is very high-end hairdressing company business that comes every year, and it comes with its best, and they do haircuts and hairdressing of the most prolific type. I'm pretty sure out in the market it probably costs $300-$400, whatever, per visit. And so I happened to be walking by, and this person, one of our clients, just happens to be coming out of just finishing, and she's looking in the mirror. She's given a mirror to see and say whether she likes it or not. And she takes the mirror, and I just happened to be walking by, and I stopped for a moment for some reason, and she stood there for felt like quite a bit, and just looking at herself in the mirror. And I could see she was sobbing. And at that moment, I connected to something very special, that it wasn't just the haircut. She was looking at herself and saying to herself, this is who I am. This is whatever has happened to me. This is not who I am. I can be, this haircut is a metaphor for the possibilities that I could create for myself. And you could see that moment. You could almost telepathically tap into what was going on in her brain and in her mind, in sort of trying to tap into those positive vibes for herself, so that, when she leaves that station and she puts that mirror down, I was hopeful, and still is today, that she left there with a different sort of pivot from a mindset perspective, because most of these issues are also, at some point, empowerment is about mindset and helping people sort of re-jumpstart or pivot back into those fundamentals that that drive them to sort of take charge of their situation and make a difference in their lives, as they make a difference in their peers and in the society as a whole.
Thank you so much, Mwarigha. And you have come with so much wealth of knowledge and clearly very thoughtful leadership. I could speak with you all day, but we are at time, so I'm going to have to say goodbye, unfortunately. But thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We so appreciate your leadership and expertise.
It was my pleasure.
That was Mwarigha. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to Mwarigha for sharing his expertise and his heart. Mwarigha.
Life is not that difficult.
Yes. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Mwarigha's leadership reminds us that while the housing crisis is complex, the core solutions, investing in people, communities, and well-designed homes are within reach. The Affordable Housing Investment Fund represents a powerful opportunity, a way to bring back investment into affordable rental development, support mixed income communities, and shift us from crisis to construction. As always, thank you to our listeners for tuning in to On the Way Home. If today's episode inspired you, please share it, rate the podcast, and keep the conversation going. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly, and this podcast is brought to you by Blue Door. In the words of a wise man, don't fall in love with the pain, focus on the solutions. Until next time, stay well, stay engaged, and keep working towards a future where everyone has a safe place to call home.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.